on gun sales in Chicago. What should we take from this?
That the Second Amendment is a serious amendment, and the courts are going to uphold it. And, Rahm Emanuel and the city of Chicago need to stop trying to evade the Supreme Court's decision on the Second Amendment. This is the fourth case that Chicago and Illinois have lost, in which they've basically tried to get around the Second Amendment requirements.
And we just played a clip regarding the amount of money that's being spent by gun control advocates, trumping those for gun rights 7-1. So why isn't the media blitz working when it comes to this issue? I understand the legal consequences here, but we're talking the legislative ability. Even when they try to exploit on the federal level a tragedy like Sandy Hook, they just can't get it done. Why do you think that is?
Because I think the average American, you can see the polling on this. They understand the Second Amendment. They believe in it, and all of the worst media publicity in the world isn't going to change their opinion about it. It's actually very similar to voter ID. The mainstream media, as you just cited, they've been trying to paint this picture of voter ID as being terrible, but the polling on this has consistently stayed the same. A majority of people think voter ID is okay because it's just common sense. And, people have the same common sense. They understand that the reason to be able to own a gun is so they can protect themselves and their families.
It really goes to that common sense is something that comes from being directly, oftentimes, impacted. Because when people vote, they see voter election fraud. They don't like that. That's something that they want verification. They want accountability, and they desire that. And I get the idea that on the left side, their agenda is based on insulating a lot of people from the decisions they make, because once you get the reality of what they want to do, you realize this doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And the other thing that I think people don't like is when they see, particularly elected officials, show contempt for the rule of law, because that's what the city of Chicago has done. Remember, 4 years ago, they had a ban on gun ownership in Chicago. The U.S. Supreme Court threw it out. So what did they do? They put in a new law that said it was illegal to sell or transfer a gun in Chicago, and basically made it illegal for gun dealers to show up. And that's the latest law that was thrown out by the court, because the court said, look, if people have the right to bear arms, they have the right to acquire them too.
So, Hans, total rejection of what Chicago tried to do and the officials tried to overstep, bottom line.
The bottom line is that Chicago now, I think, is finally going to have to start allowing and putting in reasonable rules for people to be able to own and acquire guns. They can keep trying to fight it, but they keep losing in court, and maybe that will finally teach them a lesson that they should stop spending taxpayer money on this.
When we hear about the rule of law and the arrogance of those who seem to be involved in abrogating it in some way, we see that in Chicago. Rahm Emanuel, who was part of the administration, obviously, before he was mayor, and we've seen it from this administration time and time again. I just did a segment, Hans, on people calling in and saying what they would go and march for. Okay, they would actually leave work and go, and take time away from work, their families, to go and actually do a march on Washington. What issue would it be? And the issue was impeachment for a majority of the callers. Now, I think that comes out of the fact of saying there's been a giant overstep. And while people are sitting there opposing the policies, we're not comfortable with the idea of our elected officials not following the law. Yet, Hans, we've talked about it sometimes ad nauseum. I hope not for you, certainly not for me, but I got to tell you, it's happening so much. and we don't have accountability. What is the remedy other than elections? I get that, but is impeachment the way to go?
It is a remedy, but I can't say that I think that anything like that would be successful, because over our history, we've set an extremely high bar for that. I think you really, in order to be successful, you've got to show very serious, I actually think, criminal crimes committed by a president. I don't think that was the original intention of the framers when they wrote the Constitution, but that's the way it's developed, and I just don't think, frankly, a majority of people would support that as a solution to this problem, even though it is a serious problem.
And I think that goes to how it's viewed, because it is originally, as I understand it, was looked at as a political process in that sense. It was a political remedy, and it's turned into a very much a criminal, at least the interpretation and the bar that you mentioned. So this really tells us also that we have respect for elections, and we really hold that as the high bar, because I think, and maybe you can correct me if I'm going wrong here, but in trying to interpret things, we really have said, okay, but if somebody's that bad, there's elections to get rid of them, and there's checks on their power in the midterms. So, and I'm talking about the president in this case. So we're not comfortable with that type of maneuver.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And it's the same way in which, look, we have a very stable country no matter what problems we have, because remember, it's actually remarkable history. In over 200 years, power has been peacefully handed over from one president to new presidents, with not even a hint ever of the kind of things that happens in other countries. You know, coup d'etats, people trying to take over, and it's because people expect and respect elections, and that's the way to change the government.
And in that respect, what about the lack of respect that so many of us, and I believe including yourself, this administration seems to have for the rule of law, for the equal administration of justice, like within the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, abandoning the race-neutral policy? It is at a level, are we going to see, in your estimation, President Obama and the administration officials that were not honest when they were asked before Congress, where we can see the fact that there have been violations of what their roles are by going after groups that were targeted or extra scrutiny was applied? Do you think we are going to see these things actually, will there be justice? Will it come to fruition, or will these just kind of go away by the wayside?
It's very difficult to do something about this, but for example, remember, the House of Representatives is still in court pursuing their contempt citation against the Attorney General, and the attempts that the administration made to get that dismissed and thrown out failed. So in that particular case, there actually may be some accountability depending on what happens down the road and what decision we get from the court.
And again, one of the things that you don't have a lot of is time. You make time for us. You took time to write the book, Who's Counting, with John Fund, and you are directing that over at the Heritage Foundation of Election Reform. You obviously, more than a student, a teacher of history to the rest of us, legal and otherwise, you recognize how important elections are, and keeping the process accountable and keeping those involved in the process accountable. It's great to have you, Hans. Thank you.
Thank you, Crane. Good night.
Take care. All right. So let's go to the story of the day, and that would be President Obama. Well, that was a pretty big story, and great article written by Hans von Spakovsky. I'll post it up on the Facebook. On gun control, I'm a huge believer in exercising your Second Amendment rights. I believe in doing it legally, obviously, and whatever the state law may be in regard to some of the regulations. But I oppose the restrictions that I've seen. I think that we are seeing on a federal level attempt to not address the problem, which really is dealing with mental illness and addressing that, not gun control or guns. The problem is not the weapon. The problem is the people who are firing the weapon and or using the weapon, as we've seen with knife. I just wonder after OJ why they didn't have knife control. I just never understood that. So we go now to the story of the day, which is Robert Gates' book. Excerpts are released called Duty, where he comes out and says the president, it was really, he didn't believe in the mission that he charted out. And 2010, after 2009, December, when he made the announcement to surge troops, no, he really didn't have confidence in the plan. Here is President Obama, cut number 10, announcing that decision in December 2009 at West Point. Roll it.
Instead, the review has allowed me to ask the hard questions and to explore all the different options, along with my national security team, our military and civilian leadership in Afghanistan, and our key partners. And given the stakes involved, I owed the American people and our troops no less. This review is now complete. And as Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. Most of all, I know that this decision asks even more of you, a military that, along with your families, has already borne the heaviest of all burdens. As President, I have signed a letter of condolence to the family of each American who gives their life in these wars. I have read the letters from the parents and spouses of those who deployed. I visited our courageous wounded warriors at Walter Reed. I've traveled to Dover to meet the flag-draped caskets of 18 Americans returning home to their final resting place. I see firsthand the terrible wages of war. If I did not think that the security of the United States and the safety of the American people were at stake in Afghanistan, I would gladly order every single one of our troops home tomorrow. So no, I do not make this decision lightly. I make this decision because I am convinced that our security is at stake in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Well, Gates' excerpts from his book say, quote, I never doubted Obama's support for the troops, only his support for their mission. He also writes, in one of many criticisms, by early 2010, he had concluded that the president, quote, doesn't believe in his own strategy and doesn't consider the war to be his. For him, it's all about getting out. And the president, again, quoting from this, the quote is, skeptical, if not outright convinced it would fail regarding Afghanistan. How is it that you chart a course and you don't support the mission? How do you do that and tell me that you care about the troops who are in harm's way? This is disgusting. And this book will be a major topic over the next few months. But again, we only have excerpts, so we will have to wait for the whole book next week. Robert Gates, Defense Secretary, serving numerous administrations, bipartisan. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, Honor in Your Life, Compassion in Your Heart, Always Keep the Faith in Jesus Christ. God knows you, loves you, He created you, and you're worth it. AFR Talk.